Have you ever had an opportunity to introduce yourself to somebody that you consider to be a big hero of yours, but you told yourself, man, why would they want to talk to me? I'm nobody. Well, I've had that experience several times, and I recognize now after the fact that it's all because I was telling myself this story of insignificance. Now, I've made a video in the past about insignificance, and I'm going to link it up here somewhere, that has helped me to shift out of that negative story. Because when we tell ourselves a story that we are not significant and that we don't matter, what we're really doing is we are dimming our own light and we're holding ourselves back and we're playing small. And so much of this comes from a lack of confidence, a lack of self-worth, and a lack of personal empowering belief in who we are, in our own worthiness. So let me tell you a couple stories of where this came into play and how I've learned from this experience and how you can learn from this experience too, to not only refuse to dim your light regardless of who you're around, but really believe in yourself and unlock the doors to true confidence, because that already exists within you if you will allow yourself to go there. So if you grew up in Houston in the 90s, you know the name Rudy Tomjanovich. Now, if you didn't grow up in Houston and you have never heard of that name before, that's okay. I'll make this all worth your while. Rudy T was an NBA player back in the 70s, I think, and then he became the coach of the Houston Rockets in the 1990s. Now, in the 1990s, the Rockets were average. They had pretty good seasons. Sometimes they went to the playoffs, but they often lost. And they hadn't won any championships. Why? Well, many people said it was because they didn't have Michael Jordan. But it's interesting because they did have Hakeem Olajuwon, considered to be nowadays, and even back then, one of the best centers of all time. Now, interestingly enough, Hakeem Olajuwon was drafted #1 first pick in 1984, ahead of Michael Jordan. And years later, Jordan would say that of all the players in the NBA, Hakeem Olajuwon was the only player that he feared. Interesting. That the one person that Michael Jordan, greatest player of all time, feared was on the team that couldn't seem to make it to the championships. The Bulls were winning championships left and right. Now, interestingly enough, in the early to mid-90s, Jordan decided to retire and try his hand at baseball. And it was during that period when the Rockets went to 2 back-to-back NBA championships and won. But they still had a lot of big hurdles to overcome. And one of those was winning a championship against the New York Knicks. That was the first championship. Now, Rudy Tomjanovich is known for saying, never underestimate the heart of a champion, which is really, really powerful when you think about it, because when we are around people that we consider to be champions in life, are we considering ourselves to be champions too? Are we embodying that boldness and that heart that Rudy talked about? Now, I had an opportunity when I was about 13 or 14 years old to introduce myself to Rudy Tomjanovich. And it wasn't because I went to some big event where all of the Rockets players were. Of all places, I was in a store. I was in Circuit City, which I don't think exists anymore. My dad and I were looking at televisions and just kind of goofing around. And my dad tapped me on the shoulder and pointed over about maybe 10 or 15 feet away from me. And he said, "Hey, that's Rudy T. Go introduce yourself to him." And I looked at my dad and said, "Why would he want to talk to me? I'm nobody. There's all kinds of people he'd rather talk to than talk to me." My dad said, "What are you talking about? You're you. You're amazing. Go introduce yourself to him." And I didn't do it because I didn't believe in myself. I believed that I was this runt, skinny, scrawny little dude that nobody cared about. I saw myself as insignificant. And so I had this beautiful opportunity to shake hands with somebody that I consider to be a gigantic hero, because I loved the Rockets. I loved Hakeem. I loved Kenny Smith, Vernon Maxwell. So many of the guys on that team. I was a huge Rockets fan. And I had this beautiful, glorious opportunity to go just shake hands with somebody. And at the end of the day, who would have cared if he remembered who I was? But I held myself back from even having that experience. because I was telling myself that negative story. And I almost repeated that negative story about 10 years later when I had an opportunity to meet David Dye. Now, David Dye worked for WXPN, which is still one of the biggest indie music public radio shows in the world. And he wrote a book that I honestly can't remember the name of, but he interviewed people that were fantastically giant musicians in the indie music space. And I had a relatively small independent music show. And I was syndicated in about 2 or 3 markets, and they were really small, and they were really in Texas. But I was at this event in Dallas with the radio station that I worked with. And I'm sitting down with our marketing lead at the station, and she's like, hey, David Dye's sitting over there, and he's all by himself. Go talk to him. And what did I do? I said the same thing to my marketing director that I had said to my dad 10 years prior. Why would he want to talk to me? I'm nobody. And she looked at me dead in the eyes, and she said the same thing my dad had said. What are you talking about? You have this beautiful, amazing radio show that is loved by thousands of people in our town. And you've independently, on your own, got it syndicated and picked up by other markets and other places without hiring some big marketing firm. What you're doing is incredible. You're showcasing the music of incredible people to people that they never would have otherwise gotten a chance to listen to their stuff. That's exactly the same thing that David Dye does. Go have a conversation with him. Go talk to him. Now, I did something different this time. I was nervous and I was scared, and I still thought that he'd have no reason to talk to me. But I did get up from the table, and I did walk over to where he was, and I did introduce myself to him. And I expected him to just go, oh, thanks, nice to meet you, and then move on about his day. But he didn't do that. He's like, oh, it's wonderful to meet you. Well, please sit down. I want to hear more about your show. And I got to have about a 20, 30-minute conversation with David Dye. Now, we didn't talk about anything that was relatively profound, and what he shared with me didn't necessarily change my life, but it did change the way that I saw myself. And I realized that the more I kept telling myself this story of insignificance, the more I was going to live what I felt was an insignificant story, even though what I was actually doing was incredibly significant. But I had to have the confidence and belief and faith in myself. I had to be telling myself a different story. And when I just chose to face my fears and get over this preconceived notion that who I was really small, I could have an opportunity and then have more opportunities to connect with more amazing people and just be able to connect, just be able to have conversations. And I want to say that coming to terms with that and getting over that fear in that moment and taking the responsibility and the opportunity that was right in front of me instead of shirking it off and dismissing it, created a domino effect that I would continue to experience more and more courage and more confidence in introducing myself to new people, which would create more and more opportunities for me to grow and reach more people and also build really awesome relationships. The reason I'm sharing this story with you is maybe you're like me and maybe you have told yourself this story over and over and over again about how nobody would want to talk to you because you're not big enough yet. Or who are you to want to have a conversation with somebody that has reached the epic levels of success that this person has? Trust me, my friend, it doesn't matter who you are. Your story is significant. Even if what you have faced throughout your journey has been a series of what seems like perpetual failures or setbacks, inside each one of those are all kinds of nuggets of gold and inspiration and people, regardless of whether they are massive celebrities or people who are on the journey to become the person that they want to be, or maybe are still in the place that you are right now, trying to figure out the next step forward, but really struggling with believing in themselves. We all want to connect with other people. We are driven by hearing the stories of other people. And especially when we hear stories from others, those stories are inspirational. One of the keys, though, in this whole thing, aside from having the confidence to go and introduce ourselves and start conversations, is to know that there is magic in your story. And when I allowed myself to share with David Dye in that moment that, yeah, man, I'm in a small Texas market, but what I'm doing is showcasing the music of people that I believe are incredible musicians. And they're not hugely successful yet, but I believe they will be someday. And I love giving my audience an opportunity to hear their stuff and be moved by their music. Now, not coincidentally, I would end up going on and getting my small radio show picked up by 55 or 60 markets across the world. I would have countless musicians contacting me every single day, begging me to play their music on my show. And I would also have the opportunities to actually get to interview, connect with, play the music of, and build relationships with musicians who would eventually become, and even at the time were, really impactful, significant musicians. I'm talking about folks like William Fitzsimmons, Lindsey Catt, the Rocket Boys, countless others. And then I would have my audience message me at different points later on as I kept doing the show about how they saw, not just heard, but saw musicians that I had played on my show performing on late night talk shows like Letterman and Leno and Kimmel. They're like, I saw this band play. You were the first person to play their music for me. I never heard of them until you played their stuff. And now they're playing these huge late night talk shows. But you were the one that started this, D. Grant. Thank you for doing what you do. That's significant. And recognizing that significance. So it doesn't matter whether or not you're starting out with something that's really big or you're starting out in a really, really small place. What you're doing is significant. Believe in your significance. Awaken the confidence that already exists within you, but just needs to be allowed to speak. Now, I have a self-study course that's all about this. It's called Confidence Like a Lion. I spent, like I just shared with you, a long time feeling very sheepish, hiding myself, living in insecurities and fears. And it was from a place, actually, of facing my fears that I realized that I had a lion inside of me that had been waiting, eagerly, desiring to be known and be heard. And when I allowed myself to access that part of me, everything in my life changed. And I put together a very simple, very powerful, very impactful self-study course that allows you to do the same thing. I'll put a link for it in the description below. And also provide a way for you to connect with me. Because if you have continually told yourself a negative, limiting story, that's the life that you're living. And it doesn't have to be. There's actually magic in your story if you'll allow yourself to unlock it. I'd love to help you do that. I've got all kinds of resources, coaching, and opportunities for me to be a part of your story to help you unlock the magic inside of it, step fully into your power, and operate in your greatness. I believe in you, my friend, and I look forward to connecting with you soon.